Welcome to the Martin Bailey Photography Podcast. It's March 26, 2019, and this is episode 655. We pick up the trail on the second of my Japan Winter Wildlife Tours for 2019 today, as we continue to photograph the clumsily beautiful whooper swans at Lake Kushiro. My final selection of images from this incredibly productive tour is still slightly over 300, so I have a little more work to do there, but I've been able to reduce the number of images to share with you today to a final 12, so we'll finish this series covering this year's Japan Winter Tours with this episode. The morning after our first panning session with the swans at Lake Kushiro, we went back to the lake hoping for a few more flybys, and did have a couple that gave good results. My favourite of the morning is this image, with 4 whooper swans almost overhead as they approach the lake. I really do enjoy watching these huge birds fly overhead, and when they are this close, I literally shot this with my 100 to 400mm lens wide open at 100mm. You can often hear the whooshing sound as they flap those huge wings. Their wingspan can be as wide as 275 centimeters or 9 feet, and they weigh up to 14 kilograms or 31 pounds, so it's a hefty bird, and actually the largest that we photograph on this trip. Although the sea eagles that we'll be looking at shortly do take some beating when it comes to sheer awesomeness. My other settings for this shot were ISO 400 for 1,000th of a second at f11. At the end of this day we were back at the lake for another panning session, and I was again trying to get more than one swan in the frame, and did a pretty good job with this next image, in which we can see 3 swans in a line. The heads are sharp enough to keep the image, although I'd have liked them to be just a little bit sharper. These panning shots are a lot of fun, and generally we leave this location with lots of smiling faces, and that's always a good thing to see from my perspective. The hit ratio with this kind of image is pretty low, but having 2 evenings to try it really helps too. My settings for this image were ISO 1000 for 1/50th of a second at f16, and I was out at 100mm with my 100 to 400mm lens still. Although the lake was uncommonly not frozen on the first trip 3 weeks before this, as you can see in this image, it had mostly frozen over by the time we arrived on this trip. The following morning we revisited the lake one last time before continuing our journey to our last major destination of Naosu for the sea eagles. On the way, our first stop was just 15 minutes from where we'd stayed at Sulphur Mountain. You can see where it gets its name from, with the yellow sulphur-stained fumaroles in this somewhat apocalyptic-looking photograph from our brief stop. The steam from the fumaroles was really heavy on this day, but the breaks in the cloud and clear sky made for a really dramatic-looking scene if you timed the shot just right. I was exposing this so that the sun was almost completely overexposed, and that, of course, made the shadows very dark, but the shadows slider in Capture One Pro helped me to bring back that detail, so overall, I'm happy with the results. My settings were 12/50th of a second at ISO 100 at f16, and my focal length was 35mm, with Canon's new RF 24 to 105mm f4 lens. We also made our regular first stop at the Notsuke Peninsula during our drive, and were greeted by this beautiful northern red fox that posed for us on the snow for quite a while. To avoid frightening the foxes, we generally photographed them from the bus, and just opened the windows, and of course turn the engine off to stop the vibration. Occasionally we see foxes on the peninsula with tails that are stripped of their fur, probably by the sea eagles or crows that sometimes bully them. But this fox has probably one of the most beautifully bushy tails that I've seen. I shot a number of images of him sitting up, zoomed in on his face, but the images felt somewhat empty without that tail, so I settled for this image. My settings for this shot were ISO 1250 for an 800th of a second at f8. I was using my 200 to 400mm lens with the built-in extender engaged and zoomed to 420mm. Happy with our first encounter, I was surprised to get another fox shortly afterwards in a completely different environment, but every bit as cute as the first. This guy was quite a way off, so I had to shoot this with an external 2x extender fitted as well as my 200 to 400mm lens with the internal extender, for a focal length of 1065mm. But as I've mentioned, the EOS R seems to quite like this combination, so I'm finding it very workable. This fox was actually licking his paws, then cleaning his face with them, but I've called this image Sleepy Fox, as it almost looks like he's got his head on his paws getting ready for a nice sleep. Because the light was relatively low, I was at ISO 5000 for this shot for an 800th of a second at f11, my widest aperture for this combination of extenders. It's always nice to get the fox up on the fishing nets like this, placing the foxes obviously in a fishing area from these visual clues, so the nets add a nice element of story. After a visit to the nature centre, we turned our bus around and drove back down the Nutske Peninsula, stopping this time for some Ezo deer stags that were sizing up each other's antlers. I like the flakes of snow in this, and the environment is beautiful with the stags on the frozen brackish lake just past the vegetation that they often feed on. Having said that, the lake is just a white sheet, so I've cropped this down to a 16:9 aspect ratio image, removing the top a little, as it wasn't really adding anything. You can see from the angle of the right deer's feet that they weren't really pushing at each other here, but it's nice to see them at least starting to get ready for this year's rutting season. It seems I still had my 2x extender fitted for this image, as my focal length was 685mm, and my ISO was up at 6400 with a shutter speed of a 500th of a second at f11. As I often say, with the cameras we have these days, cranking up the ISO is really not that big a deal anymore, as long as you ensure that you're exposing to the right, as in, adjust your exposure so that the rightmost data of your image is almost touching the right shoulder of the histogram. I was doing just that at dawn the following day, as we started the first of our 3 trips out on a boat to photograph the sea eagles. This was around 30 minutes before the sun actually came up over the Kuril Islands, so even at a 200th of a second shutter speed at a f5, I still needed my ISO at 12,800 to get this shot, but as you can see, there really isn't a lot of grain in this image, even in the dark bird, simply because I increased my ISO enough to get my image data over close to the right shoulder of the histogram. Had I been too scared to do that and left it at, say, ISO 3200, I guarantee you the image would have been much noisier. Another thing that you will often hear when shooting with other photographers is people lowering their cameras as a bird or animal turns away from us, calling out the image as a butt shot. I do this myself too, so I'm not calling anyone out on this. But I do want to point out that I feel it's a crying shame to completely rule out an image based on a popular idea that a certain type of photograph is in some way taboo. This shot of a Steller seagull is, I have to tell you, one of my favourite shots from this trip. I love the detail in the tail feathers and indeed the entire bird, and it doesn't bother me one bit that this is a butt shot. Another thing that you'll often hear bird photographers talking about is getting completely sharp wings, and this is also something that I purposefully do not try to do all of the time. I like to use the shutter speed of around 1,000th of a second because it sometimes allows the wings to blur slightly, adding, in my opinion, some dynamism to the photograph. I shot this with a shutter speed of a 1250th of a second and still have movement in the wingtips, but I like that here, so I'm happy with my choice of settings. My ISO was 1600 by this time, as there was now much more light, and my aperture was down at f10 with a focal length of 400mm. Of course, shots from the front are great too, like in this next image. Quite often with birds we end up with our shots being from the side, which are also nice, but because it is less common to get a bird coming straight towards you, it is nice to get some shots like this as well. As you can see from these shots, we did also get a decent amount of sea ice on this second trip. The timing of the second trip does give us a better chance of getting sea ice, although I really don't mind when we don't get any. Since talking the skipper of the boat into going out even when there is no ice, around 5 years or more ago, it has become one of my favourite ways to photograph the eagles. When the ice is there though, it does add a nice additional element. My settings for this shot were ISO 1000 at 1600th of a second at f10 with a focal length of 400mm. We went back down the Nutska Peninsula once more on our second day in Nauru, but the photos weren't great, so we'll skip to the following morning, back out on the boat as the sun rose above the Kuril Islands. I like to keep my eye out for an eagle flying close to the sun at this time, hoping for shots like this, where the eagle is almost silhouetted against the sun's disk. To enable me to get this sort of image, this is one of the few times when I use auto ISO and allow the camera to control the exposure itself. That way, when I'm shooting away from the sun, the ISO shifts to give me a brighter bird, but when the sun is in the frame, like this, the ISO drops automatically, giving me a silhouette. The other settings I did set manually, which were an 800th of a second and an aperture of f10. My focal length was 371mm. Another shot that I'm happy with from a few minutes later, while the sun was still pretty low in the sky, is this one of a Steller sea eagle, probably landing, kicking up snow and ice, but with his wings still open, as though he's about to take off. The three eagles in this shot are obviously quite dark, because I'm shooting into the sun, but I love this angle and the sense of movement in this majestic raptor. Having photographed the subjects on this trip so many times, it takes a lot to impress my wife when I get home, but she was impressed with this shot, as it's something pretty different to what I usually come home with, and that feels good. My settings for this image were ISO 1600 for 1,000th of a second at f10 and a focal length of 400mm. The following morning, once again I got lots of great shots, although the increasing number of seagulls and crows made it more difficult than usual. Before we finished our third and final trip out to shoot the eagles though, I asked the skipper to throw some fish into the sea in the open water, rather than onto the ice, so that we could get some photos like this one, with the eagles taking the fish from the water. I really like that we have the warm glow of the dawn sky reflecting in the water in this photograph, as that makes up for the fact that we had to shoot back towards the sun a little. To ensure that the eagle was bright against the bright background, I actually shot this at ISO 4000 with a shutter speed of 1600th of a second at f10. I was also very happy that the EOS R continued to perform well, autofocusing admirably against this contrasty water and ice. We did our usual drive around the base of the Shiratoko Peninsula and played with some intentional camera movement and the waterfalls, etc., around Utoro, but we'll skip those images so that we can finish the series here. Having completed all 3 of my Japan winter tours this year, shooting almost exclusively with the new EOS R, Canon's first full-frame sensor mirrorless camera, I would just like to relay that I continue to be very happy with this camera, having now shot a total of around 16,000 images with it. There was the problem of the viewfinder fogging up that I talked about in my review back in episode 650, but other than that, it has way surpassed my expectations and even my hopes. This doesn't mean that my 5DSR bodies are all of a sudden bad cameras, but I have instantly learned to appreciate the size and weight of the EOS R, and I'm now considering selling one of my 5DSR bodies and keeping the funds on my point card at my local camera store as I wait for the 5DSR Mark II, which is rumoured to also be coming along with the R mount, and therefore obviously also a mirrorless camera. Although there have been plenty of people giving the EOS R a bad rap, personally I'm incredibly pleased that I waited for Canon to finally release a full-frame mirrorless camera, and I'm really looking forward to being able to continue to use all of my beautiful Canon lenses moving forward. Before we wrap up this final Travelogue episode for my 2019 winter season, I do of course have our final round of participant comments to play you from the bus on the final morning of the tour as we headed towards the airport to fly back to Tokyo and disband. Okay, so here we are at the end of the second Winter Wonderland tour, the wildlife tour for 2019, and we're going to go around the bus and get a comment from each of the participants. So Dave, would you like to say something?
Hi, this is Dave Reck from California in the United States, and great trip. I guess 3 C's, camaraderie, culture, and cameras, and we covered them all. And personally, I got a lot of knowledge out of this trip, and that's not always true on photo tours, but fun time doing it, and feel like I came out much more accomplished than when I came in. So hats off to Martin and Yukiko and the driver. It was a wonderful tour.
Okay, thank you very much then. So Steve, would you like to say something?
Yes. My name's Steve Wood. I'm from Alexandria, Virginia, just across the river from Washington, D.C. in the U.S. And I thought the trip was tremendous fun. I learned a lot about composition. I learned a lot about photographing birds, and one of the things that impressed me most was that Martin had multiple days set up for each major event that were their uncontrollables, specifically the birds. And so we had multiple shots at the sea eagles and the cranes and the swans. And then I felt like I improved my not only compositional ability, but I improved my technical knowledge in some very important ways. And I think that the trip put together with Martin's superb command of the podcast world makes for a continuing education. And I'd rate the trip A+. Plus we had great people on the trip, and the other guests were a ton of fun. And I thought that we did really well together as a group. So I'd say it was a wonderful trip. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you very much. Yvonne?
Hi, I'm Yvonne from Australia. We had great wildlife opportunities, 3 days in each place, 3 opportunities to photograph all the wildlife. It was everything that it was promised. I want to commend Martin, not only Martin, but our driver, and Yukiko for the organization. The organization was absolutely superb. Couldn't fault you there at all. So it's been wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Matt, say something.
Hi, this is Matt Lim from Singapore. The lodgings, the food, the itinerary was great. Were great. Photography opportunities galore. Highly recommended. I know I'll be back.
Thank you very much, man. Gary.
Hi, I'm Gary from Hobe Sound, Florida. This is my first trip with Martin. We were on a marvelously organized tour, and he did the most important thing. Every day, he got us to the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
And on top of that, he even showed us how to use our cameras even better than we thought we knew how to use them before the trip.
Oh,
So good on you, Martin, and we will probably be back.
yeah, great stuff. Thanks, Gary. Okay, Don, like to say something?
Yeah, Don from California, and I have to say that the trip exceeded expectations.
Oh, great.
I got more keeper images, I think, than I've gotten on any other trip that I've been on, and it was exceptionally well organized, and I can't imagine that anybody else could put together a trip over here in Hokkaido and with the snow monkeys and do it as well as you did, with everything being coordinated, and your local knowledge and your connections with people, and coordinating with everybody, the hotel staff and the boat captain, for example, to get in the best position, the best light. So yeah, it was great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Don. Thomas.
Hi, I'm Thomas from Germany, and this was my third tour with Martin, and I'm very happy about my decision to do this awesome tour the second time. So thank you, Martin, Yukiko, and our bus driver and the back office for this awesome impressions for the last 2 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Thanks for coming back. It's always a pleasure. Barry.
I'm Barry from Columbia, Maryland. I want to absolutely thank Martin for not only being the best photo guide, but the best educating photo guide that I've ever been with.
Oh, thank you.
Exceptional in every way. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you very much, Barry. Michelle.
Michelle Stewart, Columbia, Maryland, and I'm the oddball because I take video only for my YouTube channel, and I believe I'll have at least 6 nicely edited wildlife video movies. Particularly, the Eagles on the Ice should be stunning.
What's your channel? The name of the channel?
Michelle Stewart Wildlife Videos, YouTube.
Okay, I'll link to it. Excellent. So,
This is Del from Seattle. I'm a landscape photographer, and so it's been nothing short of a revelation that with Martin's guidance and some new equipment, I could photograph things that are moving. And it's just been wonderful to learn, and I hope to do a good bit more. And thank you to Martin and to Yukiko for being the glue that holds things together logistically.
yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So, John, would you like to say something?
John from Mississauga, Ontario. It was a particularly good tour. I liked the fact that Martin actually laughed at my jokes, and I enjoyed the monkeys, and the fox is the best.
Okay, thank you very much.
Ingrid from Mississauga, Ontario. I enjoyed this trip immensely. Also my first time in Japan. I enjoyed everything actually. The trip was well organized.
So let's see, Georgia, would you like to say something?
Yeah. Hi, this is Georgia from Brooklyn, New York. This photo safari was by far one of the most important trips of my life. It was everything that I hoped it would be. It was well organized. The accommodations were wonderful. The animals were as promised, and we were well taken care of by Yukiko and Martin. Thank you.
Thank you. Sam.
Sal Sclafani from New York City. By far the best natural photo tour I've been on. The animals were great. Martin and Yukiko really had the well organized. It was safe and comfortable. The animals were well behaved. And the group was an amazing group that included people from 4 continents, and it was quite a cultural experience, both among the visitors and the wonderful way that Martin brought us into the Japanese culture was very appreciated.
I'm glad you liked it. Thank you very much.
That's great.
Okay, so Yukiko, want to say anything?
Hi, I'm Yukiko Higuchi, tour operator, and I'm from Yokohama. I greatly appreciate for all the guests and every restaurant and hotels, and Oikawa-san, the driver, and Martin. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, folks. So let's finally let's give our wonderful tour operator Yukiko and Oikawa-san a big round of applause.
ありがとうございます。Thank you very much. Thank you. お父さんありがとうございました。じゃあ、すいません。
It was lovely, as usual, to hear the group again. Now, more than 3 weeks after the tour finished. Thanks to everyone for your wonderful comments. Okay, so we'll wrap it up there now, but please do note that although Tour 1 has now sold out, we do still have some places on the 2020 Japan Winter Wildlife Tour 2, so if you might be interested, please check that out at mbp.ac/ww2020. Thanks very much for listening today. If you enjoy this podcast, please share a link with your friends. Subscribe in iTunes or your favorite podcast program to ensure uninterrupted delivery. If you have a moment to rate the podcast or leave us a review in iTunes, that helps to keep us relevant in the huge number of podcasts out there now. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter, etc. And links to everything that I'm up to are at martinbaileyphotography.com, so do drop by and take a look. I'll be back next week with another episode. But in the meantime, you take care and have a great week, whatever you're doing. Bye bye.